Okay, I'll do a quick fly through on B2EMO so far. So let me just strip it down a little bit. So I think this is kind of where we left it last time, which has got the head, the dome. So I think this is the main mech effectively. Now I had to make some changes just to improve the way the mounts are from the original release files. So I'll just talk through those. These big prints here, nothing's changed cosmetically. What has changed is the way is some of the mounting holes. So I'll talk you through those, and it's just the way the two units connect together and for the overall assembly. So I've had to do that. So apologies. What you should be able to do actually is you can theoretically use these if you've already printed them and just drill them out a little bit, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So one of the challenges has been to make is the way that this is overall assembled. The head's really nice because the head and hat, as you know, goes on with a single screw at the top, and you can remove that. That then leaves this next layer down. What I wanted to try and do is make this whole layer lift off, and we've managed to do that. So the all of this section here, effectively, I'll just show you what I mean. What we can do then is lift that up like that. Actually, let's just bring back to sorry, the risers do come with it as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. So what it does, it lifts off the main unit. So if you kind of look at it from the top, you've got plenty of clearance. Effectively, what happens is this just drops on. The reason I've done that is that then when you've got in the lower mechanisms, which I'll just bring those in and hide the middle frame. There we go. So effectively, what you've got is this tower. So you've got you'd be able to strip it right down to here. You drop this into there. Drop this into there. And effectively then this is got 4 screws, one there, one there, one there, and one there, and this top unit here will then fit onto the next section down. So the holes that are missing, these 4 screws here, I've removed some holes and added some holes, but in theory what you can do is actually drill these 4 holes through if you don't want to reprint this, and then again you can elongate or increase the size of these holes here. I'll tell you what they're about in a second. So that's the main difference against the original beta files for this one. Now the reason I've done that is, as I said, so we can lift it off with those 4 screws, makes it for easy assembly and disassembly, and changing parts out, whatever you need to do. The other thing is this top ring here. So as you know, this top ring, when it's moving, when it's in full animation mode, it kind of spins round to indicate that it spins round as the body moves up and down. So we've got that spinning motion in. The way this is done is there's a very similar to an R2 dome. There's a top ring here and a Lazy Susan. So if I take the Lazy Susan out, I'll show you. So the top ring actually bolts to the top of the Lazy Susan. So effectively what you do is you've got 6 4mm countersunk bolts that attach this top ring to the Lazy Susan, and it actually attaches from the top. So if I just do a quick sectional analysis, I can show you. So we can probably look in through there. Yeah, so you can see what it does is it fits onto the top, and then there's about a 1.5 mm gap between that and the top piece. So that enables this then to spin freely. The reason I've done it from the top is that then when we're printing this, it doesn't take any support, so you can print this base up first, then this and this. So It's again just a little tweak to get the supports up and running and working. So to finish off the assembly on here, you don't need the. You can take this whole frame off, these 4 frame off, and then what you do is you attach the top ring to the Lazy Susan, and then the Lazy Susan attaches to the base, and there are some 6mm spacers, which you can see there, which are 6mm printed spacers that just keep the top ring slightly off, and there's 3 screws for the top ring to hold it in. So it can take 6 if we want it to. I'm trying 3 first of all. If it actually creates more stability on this base, I might increase that to 6. But again, if we've reprinted these, it's just a matter of re-drilling the holes. Lazy Susan, similar to R2, when I bought this, these holes are only half drilled through, so you have to finish them off. This Lazy Susan I've got is it's, let me just get that correct. So it's a 300mm diameter Lazy Susan, and the inner diameter is 246mm. As you know, no standards for Lazy Susan, so it's a bit of a pain. If you get a narrow one, we can still make the model work. It's just that what you'll have to do is re-drill these holes a little different. You may have to drill some holes into these, depending on how everything lines up. But effectively, it doesn't mean reprints. It's a fairly adaptive model. It just means you might have to drill extra holes, and the holes you can't see through here anyway because they're on the inside lower lip. So once you've done that, what you've then got is that's your top assembly ready and done. As I said, it's got 4 screws and it attaches through to the next layer. So what I'll do now is I'm going to hide that top layer completely, and I'm also going to hide some those bits. And I'll bring in the middle layer now. So the middle layer is made up of 3 parts. There is an upper frame, which is that bit. You've got a middle frame, which is this bit, and then you've got a lower frame, which is this bit. Okay. The files do not include at the moment this lower base, because that was just there to get all of the sections right, and it doesn't include these risers at the moment. So what you're assembling is this, and then once that's assembled, the upper body can go on top of it like that. You'll end up with something that kind of looks like that, with the obviously the head and hat on there as well. So you'll end up with an assembly that looks like this, and then that's what we've got so far. To be honest, it won't be long before the middle section's done and the lower Lazy Susan's done, in which case then you'll have a pretty much assembled apart from the actual base. So by the time you're watching this video, those files are probably in there. Right, let's go through the build for those 3 layers now, just so I'll give you a bit of an overview. So the main mechanism, similar to the head, uses 8mm bars. These are 120mm long. They're all the same length. There's 6 of them. So there's 3 at the top and 3 at the bottom. And then they use the same 45mm bearings that we have that we've used in the head. So the actual riser mechanism, if you've assembled the head, will be very, very, very familiar. What you've then got is effectively an upper plate, which is part of that upper frame here, which is your top of your base plate, and then you've got 2 rods grips on each of the sides. So that's quite a simple assembly. As I said, virtually identical to the head one. The difference is you've got a servo bracket here, and you've got a servo arm. So the way the mechanism works is there's a 60 kilo servo which fits here. This 60 kilo servo's got a servo arm which gives you a 50mm lift, and then what you've got is this servo arm and this bracket here, which effectively then supports it. So that it's a fairly simple assembly, but this then bolts on with 2 screws at the top, and then you've got a bolt and probably a nylock nut that goes through there, and then you've got another bolt in there which will hold that into this lift assembly. That's your upper frame. Your upper frame is fairly straightforward. I'll just talk through the lower frame, because the lower frame is virtually identical to the upper frame. It's just a little bit bigger. It is in 3 pieces for the base plate. I will do a single base plate as well. It's just to enable it to be printed on 200mm printers, and then there's a separate plate which sits underneath, which just adds that bit of strength. If anything changes, these 2 may change because we've got to connect them to the base of the droid, so that's just mounting points, but the rest of the mechanism seems to be okay. You've then got a 60 kilo servo, same as the one at the top. There's a couple of servo arms. If I just move that servo, you can see how those fit in. They fit into slots in there, and then they're screwed from underneath. So there are your 2 servo arms, and then effectively that's your servo mounted. And once you've got the servos mounted, the arms mounted, it becomes fairly logical on how you connect it all together. The other thing of note is that there's these 2 motor mounts here. They hold Pololu 37Ds, I think they are. Just double check. 20 to 25. No, hang on, they're diameter 25. Let me. So yeah, they're Pololu 20s, I think. I'll double check on those. What they do is they provide the spin on the dome, and then you've got another set up here as well, which gives you motor clamps. So, and as the other ones, we can use these motor clamps, the same clamps for different motors, so we can choose if we want to use different styles of motors. From a cabling perspective, these 2 holes here to connect through to the head, and then you can route them through these cable tie holes here, and that enables you to run the cables then loosely down to this hole here, so that it keeps well away from all the mechanism. So it's fairly straightforward. Now I'll now talk about the middle frame, because the upper frame and lower frame are fairly straightforward. So this is at the heart of the build. You've got a cross arm section which prints out. You've got these S brackets here. So, and the way this works is you print this out, you print these S brackets out, and you print these end brackets here, and then effectively these are all the same assembly. So one of the 45mm bearings there, one of the 45mm bearings there. These show them orientating level like that. I put mine just in the middle, with both ends sticking out equally. As long as you've got the movement in the servo, it doesn't really matter, and they do work quite well equally, so that's okay. Then the thing of note on these is whilst all the holes line up, these S shapes go in a specific orientation. So if you look, you'll see one of the edges has got the edges sliced off on that end, and at the other end you'll see it's just square. So the edge with this chamfer on has to be point down, so the edge with the chamfer on points to the same side as where the servo sits. If you get that wrong, what it'll do is it'll move these bearings slightly out. It'll move one in and one out, which means that when you come to put the rods in, they won't be quite aligned with the base plate. So just a gotcha. Make sure your chamfers on these, very small chamfer on these, is pointing downwards, so it's an orientation mark really. And then it's really just, these are 50mm bolts M3 with nuts on the other end, and all you really do is assemble like this, tighten everything up, and that's your assembly. The other part is these mounts here. Now they bolt into here with a square nut, so what this is an M4 square nut. You put your M4 square nut in there, and then effectively what you do is a little bit of hot glue to hold it in place. And the reason that they're there for is when you look at it from the top, you can take those 3 bolts off and it will actually remove that middle section. So effectively these 3 mount points here will be connected to this middle piece here, to this middle section, and so you take 3 of those and you'll be able to remove this middle section off, and then reassemble it. So that's why you've kind of got the captive nuts that sit in there. You've got a hole that goes straight through there, that's to mount this servo bracket, and you've got a hole similarly there to mount that servo bracket. You'll need fairly long, just have a look what those are. I think they're about, the bolts for the servo bracket, there we go, just to see if I can get it to show you the bolts themselves. Yeah. There we go. Right. Yes, so the servo bracket ones are, well, the hole is 30mm, so you can fit a 30mm hole in there, and to get a bite you'll have to get it down to, what's that, 20, so you want 30mm, to be honest. 30 M3 30 countersunk bolts for those, and that'll hold the servo brackets in. And then once your servo brackets in, your servo mounts this way. Note the servo mounts 2 different ways depending on the top and the bottom. This one mounts with the front of the servo, with the back, with the front of servo visible. The other one mounts the other way around. So then once you've got this, the assembly after that is you put the rods in with the plates. So you put the rods in with the bearings, sorry. And then effectively you can then bolt on the lower frame and the upper frame, so you end up with your overall assembly looking a little bit like that. And then it's getting your servo testers and just aligning these properly, so, or use RC, which is probably better then, to make sure you've got them exactly right. The servos I got needed to be slightly extended in the settings on the RC controller to 120%, just to get the full 180 lift back and forth. And what you do effectively is make sure that this one swings this away, so it swings anti-clockwise. Yeah, this one swings anti-clockwise, otherwise it'll hit there. And this one here, again, this one swings clockwise because it has to go through this little hole here at the bottom. And then you've just got again an M3 bolt that goes into these main servo holes. And then effectively that's your assembly. You've got motors that go in there, and then you've got your gears which fit onto your motors. And then once you've got that assembly, what happens is you can drop in your top part, and as you drop your top part in, it meshes into that gear. 4 screws, and that's your top part connected. Obviously by that time you'll probably have your middle section on, and what will happen is the Lazy Susan will be part of this lower section, and this gear here is for similar to the top, it's for turning the lower section. So that gives you kind of a bit of an overview really of where it is. Cabling wise, trying to get all the cable down out the front here. You've got cable ties to hold the cable, and then really what I'd do is I'd get up to the maximum rise on all sections, and then just put your cable through there and secure it at the bottom somewhere. And then as it comes down, there'll be a bit of flex in that cable, but it shouldn't get caught up in any of the mechanisms. So that's the overall build so far. What I've got to do now is, obviously I've got to finish off the mid section, get that ready for printing. Got to get the risers in a position ready, and then obviously the lower base. So the lower base effectively becomes static with these risers in static position, and then effectively Tim should have his drive unit on there. So nice design, very solid. Servos are strong enough. I'm quite happy with it so far. So the only thing that might change is that base on the connection, similar to the base that changed on this one. I think Alex done a fantastic job on on the concept and the design for this lift mechanism. So it's been not an easy build to get it to this stage, but I think we're comfortable where this is. There is a few details that we'll talk through probably a little bit later on, which is things like lights, because there's little slots in here for LEDs that you can feed back up into this space here. And again, I've not routed holes for those yet, so I'm going to kind of work out what those are. So if you want to keep the same build, you maybe end up drilling some holes for that, or unless we find alternative ways of routing them. There's lights in the dome, which again they'll just follow the same dome, like the dome cables through on the top. So ultimately you're running everything really from somewhere in the base, and then hopefully in the base we've got somewhere where we've got batteries and whatever, so people can get access to battery changes. But from a mechanical perspective and disassembly perspective, it become quite easy in that you've got one bolt to take the head and hat off. 4 bolts will then remove the this middle section, so it'll remove that middle frame. Sorry, 4 bolts will remove I'm talking about the upper frame. So 4 bolts will remove that, and then you've got 3 more bolts that will then remove this midsection, which is 1, 2, 3, and then what you've got to kind of do is twist it a little bit and lift that off, and then once that section's off, you've pretty much got a stripped down unit, so you've got full maintenance access. And hopefully we've, as I said, we've still got the base to do, but you'll have a little bit more access into there to get through to cables, changing parts out, etc. I think the servo is going to be fairly easy to switch out if you ever need to, because it's literally 1 screw on the horn and then 4 screws to remove this servo. I've got to say these screws are a little bit more difficult to take out because of these brackets, so the other alternative, which I found easy, is to remove the bolts from underneath the servo, so that servo just lifts out on the bracket, and then put the bracket and you put it back on again. But again, it's fairly easy to swap out. Similar with the top one, we can get access to these 4 screws here to take that servo out, and a single screw to swap it out. So hopefully the parts will be relatively easy to remove. But again, you know, it's always a balance trying to get the accuracy and get it looking nice, combined with making it easy to maintain. Hopefully that helps.